International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor. Dr. Naledi Pandor will today host a symposium in Pretoria on how Zimbabwe can recover economically. The country is battling extremely high inflation rates. Let's go live there. The minister is on the podium.
In exploring the theme that we have chosen. Now, as the Department of International Relations, we have some appreciation of the nature of the challenges and the various economic and social imperatives. By all accounts, and Professor Mokoena has referred to some of them, there are serious and seemingly intractable political factors that might need attention, and in fact do need attention, if solutions are to be effective or implementable. The political formations in Zimbabwe remain at loggerheads and have apparent deep antipathy toward each other, which makes joint decision-making and planning extremely difficult. It seems clear that even as we support the call for an end to economic sanctions, the political dynamics that we observe are inextricably linked to the economic solutions, and thus the politics and the economic, as well as the social, need to be confronted simultaneously. We're not going to achieve the economic resolution without resolving the political, intractable hostility and lack of amity or social conjoining on finding a national solution. This coming together of the range of aspects that need attention can only be led from Zimbabwe, and would certainly, we believe, ease the development of SADC contributions in response to an emergent compact. We would be greatly assisted in playing a positive role if we knew there was a shared notion in Zimbabwe of what must be done. And this is an extremely important point for us, because while indeed, as the South African government, we work very closely with the government of Zimbabwe, it would be difficult for us to be seen as playing a role only with the government, given the large nature of the problem that confronts our country. So I think that we need to be provided with a path that indicates that as we enter to provide support, all the parties, all the groupings, all the stakeholders in Zimbabwe are at one that that assistance, that support must be brought in. All reports on the economic situation point to a debilitating crisis and social situation which is terribly worsened by international sanctions. Because what the sanctions have done is worsen the context, not improve it. I haven't seen an advance which one can say arises from the sanctions. And so we really have to address this matter of international sanctions and create an opening which allows Zimbabwe and ourselves as SADC to have some of the tools at our hand which can provide assistance. The impact that we're seeing on citizens, on public services, and on public institutions is extremely troubling, and all of us are aware of these impacts. Basic services are inadequately available. Those offering critical services earn very little income, and the cost of essential goods, such as basic food items, is beyond the ability of millions. So what this crisis is doing is creating further problems, and thus is making it even more difficult to determine workable solutions. So we need to end the crisis as soon as possible. Sanctions have failed to provide any assistance to addressing these problems and may in fact have made them worse. The situation has been equally negative for those with a livelihood as well as those without one. Zimbabwe has experienced significant loss of skills in the past decade, and this has harmed the possibility of efficient management of key economic sectors and institutions. So if we get to a point where it is agreed that we can begin to invest in particular institutions, we are going to have to look at how we bring skills back to bear into effective management of those institutions. We as South Africa have been a beneficiary, to some degree, of the loss of key skills, and there's been substantial migration to different parts of South Africa. So finding solutions to this loss of skills has to be an important and significant part of the practical solutions we would need to give attention to. We may have to devise innovative forms of institutional collaboration that would help sustain and perhaps restore the efficacy of critical institutions. Sometimes I shudder when I imagine what might happen if all the maths and science teachers were to leave South African schools. Many of them come from Zimbabwe. So how do we have a conjoined arrangement which won't lead to a collapse in these subject domains, these very important subject domains in South Africa, but support as well a revival in their sustainability in Zimbabwe? So I think conjoined collaborative solutions are going to be an important area for us to examine. It is possible that SADC might need to go beyond the resolution we adopted and engage those who have imposed sanctions to agree on lifting these sanctions to support the recovery of critical sectors such as health, agriculture, finance, and of course the social sectors of education and agriculture. I hope our panelists today, the discussants, will share ideas from work that they've been leading in their respective institutions and disciplines. It is possible that they are alert to how we might initiate an inclusive political dialogue, or how we can give attention to economic sectors that could be the vehicle for promoting increased employment and future growth for Zimbabwe. We do not by any means pretend as DIRCO that we have the answers, and it is our hope that we are going to benefit from the wisdom of this dialogue. We do believe the imposed sanctions have not resulted in an end to the problems. Thus, we think we need to have a move beyond merely describing the problems and toward identification of key steps that would give us real change, growth, and stability in Zimbabwe. And as DIRCO, I wish to assure you, if we believe out of these deliberations there are approaches that actually make practical sense and that we could play a role in, we will certainly take them up. And perhaps in another year we'll call you again to a similar symposium and indicate to you whether there's been any success or not. So this is really intended as a very practical, open discussion whose intention is to seek solutions. That's really what we're about. It's not by any means an intellectual exercise, because unfortunately, while I aspire to be intellectual, I can't engage in blue skies intellectual deliberations any longer. What we need are practical solutions. What we need is a way out of the problems. And we will have to find this, of course, with the people of Zimbabwe. I hope that in future we would have a much broader set of engagements, but this is a beginning, which I hope will give us some direction. So let me conclude by thanking you very much for having agreed to come to this initial seminar, symposium. And let me say that I believe, for me, that it's the first of what we need to do. And I hope that on all the matters that we must confront with respect to our continent, that we're going to begin to do so in a very deliberate fashion, and that we're going to move beyond resolutions and policy documents and really start saying to ourselves, what does this mean in practical terms? We have policy documents on everything. There's nothing you will not find a resolution on. The problem is, how do we give practical effect to these things? How do we change the character, not just of Zimbabwe, but of Africa? How do we move into that difference that is aspired for in our resolutions and our policy instruments? And my concern is that we need to be wary of being famous for excellent conference statements, but inadequate practical action. It can't be that we have decades of freedom and we don't have proper sewerage facilities. There's something wrong in the way we're approaching our problems. And this is why I'm convinced that one of the things we need to do, even in the international domain, is gather in this fashion and start to share thoughts, not in an ambassadorial diplomatic fashion, but a real one with academics and others involved, to start engaging on how do we convert excellent frameworks into practical action. That's all this meeting is about. Nothing more ambitious, nothing more adventurous. And I thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
We're coming out of that conversation that's currently underway. The Minister of International Relations, Dr. Naledi Pandor.